Hello, good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Pralpiki Karpina. I'm a parliamentary intern for the environment, working alongside the team of MP Benkar. I'm calling in today from the traditional lands of Kwanlindan First Nation and Tamquatchan Council here in Whitehorse, Yukon. As a former Northern Environmental and Conservation Sciences student, I am thrilled to be here today moderating this fireside chat with the remarkable MP Adam Van Koeverden. Before we dive in, let's give a warm welcome to MP Adam Van Koeverden, Member of Parliament for Milton and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Sport and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. He is known for his dedication to public service and sports excellence. MP Van Koeverden is a celebrated Olympic kayaker who has represented Canada at 4 Olympics, winning 1 gold medal, 2 silver, and a bronze. He is a first generation Canadian and grew up at Chautauqua Co-op in North Oakville. Adam, would you like to share a few additional words to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks very much, Pearl. It's so nice to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity and for the introduction. I'm joining you from Milton on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and many other First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And I just want to acknowledge that we share these lands and are very grateful with many Indigenous people and groups, including Inuit and Métis and First Nations. Halton region is where I've lived for most of my life. It is between Mississauga and Hamilton, and it's a place of deep environmental concern, both for me and for the vast majority of our community. It's a place where sprawl has occurred from the perspective of development, mostly residential development, but it's also part of a natural biosphere that's very unique in the world. So there's a balance to ensure that we stand up for. We have amazing conservation authority here, and we've got a lot of great activists. I spend a lot of my time on the water, on the creeks and rivers and Lake Ontario, and I'm a lifelong environmentalist, and I'm thrilled to be serving now in the government as the Parliamentary Secretary with Minister Guilbeault on the environment and climate change, as well as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Sport and Physical Activity, which brings to me the opportunity to combine both my passions and my backgrounds as an athlete and an activist. So I'm looking forward to the questions. I'll keep my eye on the chat as well as we go. I love this format. Having an opportunity to interact a little bit is way better than just having me talk for 10 or 15 minutes. I did one just like this yesterday here in Milton with our Milton Youth Task Force, and they had lots of great questions, primarily on affordability, university stuff, because they're all going to university next year. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. And I think I'll probably hold it off there so that we get more time for Q&A.
Thank you. And once again, welcome to our fireside chat.
Thanks.
Okay, for our first question, Adam, your unique journey from Olympic athlete to member of parliament is an inspiration to many. You've touched on this a little bit in your introduction, but how has your experience as an athlete informed your approach to advocacy work, particularly in areas such as promoting physical activity, environmental conservation, and social justice?
Well, thanks, Pearl. So for a bit of background, I went to 4 Summer Olympics for Canada in the sport of kayaking. So I was always on my own. Kayaking is a sport that can be individual or team-based, but I was always in what's called the K1, so it's a single kayak. And I always love to acknowledge that canoes and kayaks are Indigenous inventions that I feel very, very lucky, privileged, and honored to have been able to use to get myself to 4 Olympic Games and many World Championships and World Cups in between. Initially the kayak was invented for transportation and hunting and exploration, and being able to use it in races representing Canada is a privilege, and I want to acknowledge that. And 4 Olympics. So I went to Athens, Beijing, London, and the Rio de Janeiro Olympics. I was also on the board of directors of the host organizing committee for the Vancouver Olympics, and on the CBC's broadcast team for both the Pyeongchang and Sochi Winter Olympics. So I've done a lot of the Olympic Games, but I was also the chair of the Athlete Commission for almost 9 years in Canada. And that allowed me to do a lot of government relations and advocacy work for athletes, but also recreation and physical activity in Canada. I'm a really big believer that physical activity and recreation, primarily for youth, is an excellent vehicle and tool to improve lives, improves mental health, improves physical health, and increases our our social networks, and it's just really good for society in general. So I think investments in recreation, hobbies, just keeping people busy, keeping people active and moving is an investment in our collective future and health. And I don't think there's any limit to how much we can do that. But the main thing that canoeing and kayaking taught me is the value of hard work, and the reality that when you're working hard, even if you're not getting the results that you're looking for, even if you kind of feel like you're just grinding away and you're not really achieving anything, there's also intrinsic value in hard work, because you get better as you work hard. You improve, your resilience and your fortitude. You get stronger every time you work hard, whether it's practicing a task or just doing exercise or doing something non-physical as well. And that's true whenever I'm sort of testing myself as a member of parliament as well. But I also know that hard things are worth doing. There's value in trying to strive and stand up, put yourself out there, get vulnerable, and stand up for what you believe in. And I'm always trying to ensure that I get the most out of my efforts and my days. And when I left the sport of kayaking after my 4th Summer Olympics, I wanted to make sure that I was going to maximize my time and impact in the world. I wanted to make sure that every ounce of energy that I put into my work was going to have reciprocal sort of value on society. So that's why I decided to get involved in politics, so that I could continue to meet with organizations and individuals who have great knowledge and expertise. I wanted to share it. And I thought, what is a better reflection for like a modern society than one that's interested and willing to take great evidence, facts, research, and academics and create policy with that, rather than creating policy with just sort of some people call it common sense, other people call it your gut, other people just will call it populism. And we're seeing populism kind of expand around the world and take a little bit of root. And I think that's problematic. We've got to be evidence first. We've got to lead by what experts are telling us is the best path forward, and our policies should reflect that. And I'm proud to be a part of a government that believes the same.
Awesome. Thank you for that wonderful advice and for highlighting the importance of hard work. And building on that, you've engaged with numerous youth organizations like Right to Play, Water Aid, and the David Suzuki Foundation, just to name a few, and schools across Canada. How do you believe young people can be effectively engaged in the political process, particularly in addressing critical issues such as climate change and environmental sustainability?
Well, I met with the Milton Youth Task Force yesterday, and this is one of the things we highlighted. I also, about twice a week, go into schools and talk to grade 5s and grade 10s, because in Ontario, on the curriculum, that's when they study social sciences, and they do a unit on civics and politics. But I always tell young people who are under 18 that they don't have a vote, but they do have a voice, and a really important one. So it's more challenging for young people to engage with political leaders. It's not as though there's like a youth lobby coalition, although I just thought of that now, and it's a really good idea. Maybe we should start a youth lobby coalition and get more young people talking about their priorities, because young people have the most invested in the future of Canada and the world. You're likely to be here the longest, and you have more to gain or lose on the basis of what types of decisions and choices we make as a government. So I think it's fundamentally important. It's vital that young people are engaged and vocal about what their ideas and priorities are, certainly before they get a vote. And look, voting is really only one way to be democratic. Politics is all about just talking to people and engaging and sharing ideas. And I truly believe that politics should be a contest of great ideas. So it's up to you how you engage. If you want to join a group or find a candidate that you believe in and volunteer. If you want to do some writing or dedicate some time on social media to your advocacy, then I applaud that, and then I hope you do. But don't be afraid to call your MP or email your MP. Don't be afraid to be persistent. Don't be afraid to ask them hard questions. They asked for this job. I remind myself, I asked for this job. I asked for the criticism, and I asked for those conversations, and sometimes those are difficult. But I'm going to ask for it again. Whenever the next federal election is, I'm going to go out and knock on doors and ask my neighbors to vote for me. And part of that is an exchange. I'm going to ask for their support, and they also should be able to ask me to listen and to hear them out. And that includes people with no vote, which is anybody under 18. So I know that engaging is hard. It can be nerve-wracking. It can make you nervous. It's also tough to be vulnerable sometimes and to tell your personal story. but that's how progress is made. And everybody has a different way of expressing themselves or communicating those priorities and preoccupations. But it's so vitally important that you do. So sometimes it's easier in a group. Yesterday there was 30 or 40 young people around the circle at the Milton Youth Task Force. Whatever way you feel maximizes your strengths as a communicator, I encourage you to engage.
So, thank you. You've touched on youth empowerment already in your previous answer. Like you said, young people have the most at stake today. You yourself are a first generation Canadian and a prominent advocate for youth empowerment. Is there anything you want to add on how do you believe diverse voices and perspectives can be better represented in Canadian politics, such as youth under 18, international students, immigrants, and so on?
Yeah, of course. So I do my best as a member of Parliament to engage with young people, whether that's in school visits or opportunities like with the Milton Youth Task Force yesterday. But maybe not every MP does. So if you feel as though you have an MP that doesn't necessarily engage with youth and young people as much, then create a forum for them and offer an opportunity for them to come and listen and talk to young people. I think that'd be really constructive. And you can do that with your town and city council. You can do that as a delegate. You can ask for time at your town or city council to discuss important issues. You can write letters. Writing letters is sort of a lost art form, I think, because now we're doing social media. So messages tend to be in 140 characters or less, and have to include an edited video or a nice photo or something like that. But there's nothing wrong with just putting pen to paper or typing out a nice one-page letter on the things that are important to you. But you can also do it from like an extra political place. You can also engage with non-government organizations or with charities that you believe in, doing a little bit of volunteer work. I want you to feel and know that no effort is too small. Just because you pick up a little bit of garbage and you're just one person doesn't mean that effort was for nothing. When you're practically engaged in our communities, you're doing good work. And when you encourage others to join you, you're doing even better work. So engage, recruit, be consistent. Don't be discouraged if you get a few no's or if you don't get a response. But I always tell people, if you don't hear back in a couple of days, then call back. And if you don't hear back on an email, then it's okay to hit resend. Because persistence often, gets a response.
Awesome, thank you. Switching it to another topic, in your role as a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, you play a key role in shaping Canada's climate policies. With many Canadians primarily concerned about affordability, how do you effectively communicate the connections between climate action and the cost of living?
Well, we often say as a government that if you don't have a plan for the environment going forward, then you also don't have a plan for the economy, because they're intrinsically connected. One of the number one causes of inflation is actually climate change, particularly in the grocery store. When you're looking at produce and you consider where some of that produce is grown and produced, consider that when there's floods and wildfires and natural disasters and all sorts of other environmental impacts, that increases prices just as much as other geopolitical factors and corporate greed. And that's a very hot topic and a very real concern as well. But they're all we live in a complicated world with competing factors. But climate change is consistently the most persistent issue and concern that I think we're grappling with, and our impact on this world as we want it to be a sustainable place for us to be able to live out our lives, but for future generations as well. We really are at a pivot point in our species existence. We need to make some decisions, some tough ones actually, some ones that might cost a little bit of money, but it is for the benefit and really the survivability of future generations. I don't think it's extremist to suggest that climate change is an existential threat for humanity. I think it's accurate because that's what the science and evidence suggests. That's what researchers tell us. There are people who spend all of their day focusing on paleoclimatology and the impact that we're having on our planet. So, I always say it's very, very much the same thing. When we're talking about affordability and talking about fighting climate change, I remember there was this quote from one of my favorite authors Kurt Vonnegut, the quote was basically something along the lines of how depressing to realize that we had all the solutions to change our ways and improve the world and save the planet from what they called global warming back when he wrote it. Too bad we were too darn cheap, is what he said. Innovation is going to be good for the economy. Every time we invent something that's less emitting and more efficient, that saves money in the long run. So I did a talk recently in front of a lot of business leaders, and I talked about how efficiency and environmentalism are linked, but they're also a good way not just to reduce our carbon, but also to reduce our costs. It's very much intrinsically linked. It's kind of depressing, in the House of Commons. I was going through some of the comments in the chat, and I saw that the price on pollution was a theme in the previous panel. And it's kind of depressing that in the House of Commons we spend so much time talking about whether or not we're even going to have carbon pricing, regardless of the fact that it's a very proven method of reducing our carbon emissions, and that from an affordability perspective, the 80% of Canadians who are on the lower and medium income scale all get more money back, because the very basis of the price on pollution makes big polluters pay and sends more money back to families who need it. So on a small scale, the Canada Carbon Rebate is also an affordability mechanism, because if you consider a family of four who is on the lower income scale and they're earning, say, $48,000 for a family of four, that's very modest and challenging. But a family of four in Ontario would receive $1,120. And I know that when I was growing up in single family household and community housing, $1,100 would have gone a really long way. I know if we use inflation and go backwards, maybe in the 90s or 80s, it wouldn't be $1,100, but we're talking about a significant amount of money that does help pay the bills for a lot of Canadian families. And it's also having a market impact on our emissions profile, because we are on track now to meet our 2026 targets, which is new because, for decades, we've been hearing that Canada is not going to meet our commitments from an internationally agreed upon environmental framework, but we are now. And that took work, it took risk, and it took courage. And it's our government that turned the tide, reduced our emissions profile, and bring them down has been challenging, but we've done that while also increasing our economy. And I think that's really remarkable that we're on target now to meet our 2026 emissions targets. We put a little bit more into that suite of measures, and we're going to be on target to meet our 2030 emissions targets. And that's all on a mission to become net zero by 2050. It's not just possible, it's inevitable if we keep pushing hard. And it's not just inevitable, it's also necessary for the survivability of our species. So when anybody ever tries to link, carbon pricing to affordability, remind them that they're just doing a big favor for big grocery, big oil and gas, who are gouging Canadian consumers with massive profits, and leaning in on the conversation that, it's just carbon pricing. It's not carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is a rebate program that supports families in need, and it's corporate greed that's driving up prices and the lack of competitiveness in a lot of those markets, which our government is addressing with changes to the Competitiveness Act, and the Canadian Grocery Code of Conduct, which is going to go a long way in making sure that we don't see things, like we did not that recently, but that bread fixing scandal with Loblaws is pretty clear that our grocery chains don't have our best interests at heart. So our government's standing up to those giants in corporate Canada. It's the same in housing, actually, but we didn't touch on housing. But no, I think it's so important that we have people standing up to the concept of capitalism on that scale, which is definitely hurting Canadians.
Amazing. Thank you so much, MP Adam Van Koeverden, for your time and for providing great insights into your advocacy work in climate change, environmental conservation, physical activity, and youth empowerment. And I think that we got some news that you're open to staying for a quick 5 minutes Q&A.
Yeah, sure. If there's any questions, I'd love to take a couple. I know that it's been an active chat, but I haven't seen too many in the chat. Oh, we've got one here.
Awesome. Amazing. All right. So for our first question, given that you successfully represented Canada in the Olympics 4 times and are now an MP, how did you manage to throw yourself out there even when things feel new?
Yeah, well, embracing risk and challenges is a big part of life, and it can be scary. I think it's okay to be scared. I often tell people about nervousness that being nervous is just energy in your body that's trying to get out, and it's important to be nervous. When you're scared about something, or when your palms get sweaty before like a test or a race or an exam or a recital or something like that, that's just energy that's building up inside your body that wants to get out. And it can come out through sweaty palms, or it can get out through a really fantastic performance. And the reason that we practice and the reason that we train and we try hard is to learn how to channel that excess energy and that nervousness into something productive and constructive, like great performance. But it's easier actually for it to come out in terms of like a just kind of nervous energy can also just produce a negative reaction. It can cause you to sort of want to quit. It can cause you to be stressed out and to kind of freak out a little bit. And I've experienced that, and it's just a matter of practice and learning how to lean into the nerves a little bit and channel it into something really positive. And that was true when I entered politics. Like, I'm not an expert politician. I didn't study political science in university. I didn't work for an MP or a politician before ever getting involved. I really only volunteered on a couple of campaigns in very modest fashion. So I didn't really know what I was getting involved in, but I was open to risk. I had an open mind. I knew that I was going to learn a lot along the way, and I didn't put too much pressure on myself to become an expert overnight, because I've been doing it for 5 years and I'm still not an expert. And that's okay. We're going to, life's about learning. So take risks. Don't be afraid of taking risks and trying new things and saying yes to great new opportunities.
Thank you. Next question is, why is the government still investing more money in oil and gas compared to the renewable and green energy sector? I understand if Alberta might be investing in more oil and gas, but why?
It's a good question, Nathan. I think your question is sort of, there's a little bit of a preamble there that I would challenge. I don't think the government's investing more money in oil and gas compared to renewables and a future sustainable economy. I think we are actually the first oil producing nation to end all oil and gas subsidies, and we're also the first oil and gas producing nation to put a cap on emissions. And we've taken a lot of criticism for that. There's billboards all over Ottawa when I walk to work about Canada's clean oil and gas sector. The reality is Canada's oil and gas sector, there are a lot of jobs, and it's a very necessary part of the economy. And we still all use oil and gas in our daily lives every single day. It's up to consumers to lean away from that a little bit. And as a government, we've also taken the necessary step of eliminating all of those subsidies, while recognizing that it's an important sector for jobs and for the economy. But it's not a question of if we invest in oil and gas, it's how, because we also need oil and gas companies to innovate and to be part of the transition to greener, cleaner, sustainable forms of energy production. They're experts on energy. So it turns out that a lot of companies who have traditionally been invested in oil and gas are also quite interested in solar and wind and nuclear and hydroelectricity. So, energy companies are sort of leading the way in some of those transitions and into a more sustainable future. I think I've been looking at a lot of graphs recently, just because recently that national inventory report came out. And one of the graphs that struck me most was that the oil and gas sector in Alberta has sort of flatlined with respect to their carbon emissions, but it's because their carbon emissions for some type of oil and gas production and extraction have come down while others have gone up. So I think it's all about innovating in ways that will make the environmental impact of the oil and gas sector more and more sustainable as we sort of wean ourselves off of fossil fuels entirely. That transition will take time, and it will also require funding and investment, because while I'm a big fan of the oil and gas emissions cap, I think it's a necessary and important step forward. It's also pretty bold. We are an oil and gas producing country, and we're the first country like Canada to step up and say, no, we're doing this. We're reducing our emissions. And there's still a few culprits. And when oil and gas companies come to Environment Committee, I ask them those tough questions about why, For example, the carbon intensity of a barrel of oil sands produced oil is still going up after decades. You would think that they'd be able to innovate. So I actually don't personally believe that oil sands oil production is a sustainable way to produce oil and gas. And I know that our government is moving towards investments in greener, cleaner, more sustainable methods of energy production at a much higher rate than Canada is investing in older forms of energy production.
Okay, well, thank you again, MP Adam Van Koeverden, for your time and taking a few important questions for the audience and for your ongoing work as a parliamentarian.
Thanks, Pearl. And thanks for the questions.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we are out of time, and moving into our next session is panel 1, Beyond the Ballot, Maximizing Electoral Participation, starting at 12:30 p.m. So that's about 15 minutes from now. So please go eat some food and drink some water. There's also an Eat Lunch with Me networking table. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back with this session.